Good evening, welcome to the show wherever you're watching across Africa and beyond. Now this week we host Elizabeth Lwanga. This former television producer and correspondent has over 30 years experience in development work. She's worked for Uganda Television, Voice of Kenya Television, now known as KBC. She's also worked for Oxfam America and extensively within the United Nations. We get her views on matters affecting growth and development in Africa. We also get your views on the issues. And we have Africa's top 10. You're watching the Africa Leadership Dialogues. I'm Julie Gichuru. Elizabeth Lwanga has worked across various sectors, including media. She has extensive experience within the United Nations and has served as Deputy Regional Director for Africa at the United Nations Development Programme, United Nations Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator, and UNDP Resident Representative in Sierra Leone, Swaziland, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Zimbabwe. Now, she first joined the UN as UNDP Deputy Representative in the Gambia, then manager of the UNDP Gender in Development Program in New York. Elizabeth has also worked as Interim Regional Program Director for UN Women, that's in the East and Horn of Africa. Currently, Elizabeth works as an Innovations in Development Advisor and serves on the boards of Africa Development Alternatives, Uganda, Liberia and Kenya, the Africa Women's Development Fund, AWDF, Equity Bank Uganda, and Inorero University Council in Kenya. Now, from that rather impressive profile, let's get her insights into Africa. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for joining us on the Africa Leadership Dialogues. Now, Africa is a fascinating continent. I was part of a group called the Archbishop Desmond Tutu Leadership Program. And I remember in our classes studying Africa and leadership, some people saying, but what is Africa? Is there a notion of an Africa? Are we just too different in our regions and our respective countries to call ourselves one? Let's start there. At the very basic level, we talk about Africa, but is there a notion of one Africa?
Absolutely. Not only that we are in one geographical space, but I truly believe that we are a people that are really one people in so many ways. I think that we recognize our similarities, our commonalities. We also remember our history, that we are all these different nations, not because that was the natural division of who we were, but that others somehow came and divided up our continent. And I think that those who tend to think that there is no Africa or there is no notion of Africans seem to maybe are taken in by all the difficulties that the divisions that were created, the artificial divisions that were created have caused. I come from Uganda. I've lived a lot of my life in Kenya. And I'm so aware of the almost meaninglessness of the border between Kenya and Uganda, because truly on either side of that border, you have the same people. We have families that are split. Part of the family call themselves Ugandans, another part of the family call themselves Kenyans. So we truly have what one can call Africa.
Talking of this notion of Africa and the Pan-Africanism that existed in the 60s, 50s, 60s, and maybe going into part of the 70s, then it seemed to dwindle out. What happened to that great spirit of Pan-Africanism?
I think that the momentum for Pan-Africanism was mainly driven by the struggle for political independence. And a lot of what we really saw as the hope for our continent, were all more or less invested in that hope for an independent, politically independent Africa from colonialism and invasion and whatever else that we had. What I think has contributed to the loss of that momentum was the shock reality that after political independence, we saw that we were not truly independent because of the failure to secure economic independence. And I don't know how our four leaders somehow missed that. And I think that's what really has led to the fragmentation, the total, even the chaos that has come on the continent, because that failure to secure economic independence in tandem with political independence created a lot of loopholes that brought back a lot of the, you could call it invasion or the intrusion by outsiders, and that continues.
No, that was now existing via the economy.
Exactly.
and big business,
Exactly.
international business
Exactly.
taking African space and taking control in many of our countries. This spirit is building back up. Yes. We can feel it. We can feel it amongst our leaders. We see it at the AU.
Yes.
And some Africans are buying into it at grassroots level. Not all quite understand it. People are dealing with challenges. What would you say to an African who asks the question, what has this got to do with me? Why should I care about Pan-Africanism?
I think that it's a difficult question to answer, as you say, to somebody who really is struggling to survive in their own village, but keeps hearing through the radio, through everything that comes through government about what's going on with the efforts for integration, the efforts to come together as a continent, the rebirth of the Organization of African Unity as the African Union, and all the efforts that are going on, because they are everywhere. People hear them. What perhaps we have not done is to take the time and articulate those efforts properly and simply to ordinary people, to ordinary Africans, and make the link between the importance of Africa organizing itself and coming together as a unit, as in unity and as a force vis-a-vis the whole global developments, global trends, if Africa and Africans and African nations are to rise to the position that they should be in. I think that a lot of what goes on out there in Addis Ababa, or occasionally when the African Union or sub-regional union meets in one of our countries, then of course the citizens of that country, wherever they are bombarded with all this information about these people and all the dignitaries, but still without us taking the time to truly explain what the link is, with when Africa came up with NEPAD, to what extent, and I know there was probably more effort with that than anything else, to articulate this and indicate what does that mean in terms of how we are governing ourselves, in terms of the systems we have in place for our own economic development efforts, or for our education, and all of that. I think it's difficult to explain to an individual, but it has to start to be done systematically.
For instance, for a farmer, how does African unity, lobbying at various global organizations affect the price of your produce? Precisely. How does it, improve your life?
Or what does it mean to a farmer producing their crops and encouraging them to produce more, and to say that because within Africa we can sell those crops.
You can now access
exactly, or you can get other crops, other products that come from another African country, rather than where we send them today, or where we still actually
where we send them and import them back
after they are manufactured for us.
Yes.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
Let's talk about culture now. And we seem to be locked or lost between two cultures. Our own traditional cultures, many of our societies still hold on to a lot of cultural practices and beliefs, and yet there's the modern culture, what we see largely as Western influence. How does Africa start to define its place in between these two?
It's an extremely important subject that you raise, and I'm somehow convinced that as we struggle for ownership of our own economies, as we struggle for real political independence, we will attain those when we have truly got back in touch with who we are, gone back to realize that Africans, all these large numbers of people, especially the people that have very little to do with the political justice systems and all the stuff that go in our capitals, that back in our rural communities, the people's, the way the society is structured in terms of interactions among the population, understanding relationships, is still very much what Africa is. What we have done is to go and make official systems, processes, and institutions that are not necessarily African and come and superimpose them. And we have adopted those as the formal systems, processes, and institutions and organizations, and what we are using in a formal sense. And I think that's also part of the disconnect that is hindering our ability to really take the leap and move forward. If, on the other hand, we had the foresight and the capacity to insist on holding on to what we have and borrowed from those other systems and processes that usually are sold to us as democratic systems for democratic governance, if we had been able to just interrogate them a little and see how best we can adapt them with what we have, I think we would have brought on board so many more people. That is why, I just want to go a little bit on the political side. That's why in our countries, every 5 years, you find countries going through what's so-called democratic multi-party elections. Do you know that Africans die every 5 years in their country because they are using a system to choose leaders that truly
is alien to them?
Exactly. It's alien, and it probably does not even yield the results that would be yielded if we had used our own way of sitting down and saying, who is a leader here? Who can represent us to the center? Somehow, the experience I've had with those processes, and especially when I've worked with the United Nations and been responsible for assisting countries with elections, I truly have a strong sense that if you went to an African community and you gave them the two choices of looking for their representative to send to the central body that brings the nation together, and you said, use your own channel of selecting who this leader is, or we give you these elections and secret ballot and all of that and the campaigning that go on before that, that community will probably choose two different people using the two different systems, because the set of values they attach to each of those systems is somewhat different.
That's fascinating, and I think something we need to definitely interrogate further as a continent. Many people across Africa asking, does democracy really work for Africa? Then the answer you normally get is, it's not the best system, but it's the best of...
Or they say, what else is there?
There we go. But
we have not taken the time.
We need to think about it.
We have not taken the time to say, what is it that will work for us? What is it that can take us out of this chaos in the name of implementing democratic governance? Because it is chaotic. in our countries. People get scared. These days, some Africans go away, those middle-class Africans that really don't care who is being elected. When elections are coming, they go on holiday. They go away and take their children away because they are scared of all the chaos that's going to come up.
Yes, and all the destabilization for several months,
Yes.
just going through this process
Yes,
of choosing
and the
a
loss of
leader.
life.
Yes.
And the loss of life.
Let's talk about the fact that it's not in many societies that you see the masses on the periphery. Normally in societies, the masses dictate what happens, and yet in Africa, you see the women on the periphery, who are the majority, and also the youth on the periphery, who are a huge majority. What are your thoughts on this, and what's your message to women and the youth in Africa?
That is something that really boggles the mind. Let me address the issue of the youth. It doesn't matter where you go in any of our countries, and you see these idle young men, especially men, because the girls are at home washing clothes and cooking food and fetching water and all of that. But you see all these idle young men just loafing around, not because they don't want to do something, but some of them have gone to school, but they've not been able to do anything else. It's a time bomb. In fact, it's no longer a time bomb. They have been really the channel for a lot of the conflicts, the internal violence, this what I call chaos that breaks out every now and then in our countries. It's the youth. They are youth because they are idle. They don't see a future. They have nothing to lose. They can go chop off somebody's head because so what? What's the difference? There is nothing for them. And that, what I've not been able to understand is how we can afford to allow this to go on. Yes, we have youth policies. All our countries have youth policies. All our countries have youth plans. They've set up youth enterprise funds, a number of them, for the youth to, yes, a few young people may have benefited from this, but what I have not seen is a real emergency response to this crisis. When an earthquake happens, when a drought happens, when there is no food, we know how to put in place very quick response mechanisms to address a crisis. And I don't know why we do not see the issue of the youth in Africa
crisis, or not as a looming crisis,
an
but as a
existing
crisis
that we are just waiting to get bigger and bigger and bigger until it truly just explodes. The other side of it that also I find totally incredible to understand is that we all know these youth are the people that are going to be parents tomorrow. Some of them are already parents. A lot of those young girls are mothers already when they shouldn't be, but because they are idle. But they are the ones that are bearing children, are going to bear children, be the mothers and the fathers, to raise a new generation.
With what values?
And have not been invested in any way. That also is something that I cannot understand.
We cannot afford a lost generation, and this is what I see when you talk of this. I see the possibility of a lost generation. Speak to our leaders now. What must they do to address this?
I think to wake up, wake up, really, and understand that unless we invest in the young people, we have no future. Our countries have no future except to disintegration into this phrase that development people, those of us in development, like to call totally failed states, that there will be nothing. There cannot be development, there cannot be growth. There will not be a new generation that can take this continent anywhere. And I know that the narrative today is that Africa is on the rise. And I believe in many areas Africa is on the rise. But Africa is rising still with just a few people. Africa is not bringing with it the population, especially the population that is going to be leading Africa tomorrow.
You leave us with some weighty matters and on our mind, and that's an important thing. We must consider these issues. As a final word, please, Elizabeth, look into the camera. What's your message to Africans watching you?
First and foremost, realizing, confirming, and loving the fact that this is our continent. It's a beautiful continent. It's rich. Fixing it, I believe, is doable with right leadership. If the leadership is ready to take a firm stand against all the pressures that Africa faces to deter it from moving forward, I believe that our leaders can do it, especially if they know they have to bring the population with them. Let us wake up, because this is all that we have. This continent is all that we have as Africans.
Thank you very much. So powerful.
Thank you.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
I'm Elizabeth Lwanga, a development professional and director of a growing organization called Africa Development Alternatives that is looking into different ways of addressing Africa's development. Welcome to the Africa Leadership Dialogue.
Fascinating insights from an incredibly inspirational woman. And now it's time to get your views on the issues.
This week we asked you, in your view, what sectors should African governments prioritize their development agenda? Isaac Wainaina says they should focus on sustainable agricultural practices, promote tourism, proper education, ability to control its mineral resources, and, in conclusion, fight corruption and impunity. Salwa Linda Kavuka says education, health, agriculture, infrastructure and energy in that order. If the above are met, the economy will definitely grow.
In my view, African governments should prioritize the development agenda in the following sectors. First one is infrastructure. Without infrastructure, there cannot be any meaningful development in a country. So if infrastructure is one of the essential ingredients for any development to be there. Number two should be employment for the youth. Then number three, security. There should be enough security so that investors can feel safe and also they can invest in the various sectors in our African continent. Number four is let's look for economic independence from Western nations and also the East. Let us be independent. Let our budgets be fully financed by our tax revenues, but not meaning that they overtax us, but let them be careful on the way they tax us, and also just work on how to look the budgets are fully financed by our taxes. Thank you.
To join our conversation, go to our G+ page, Africa Leadership Dialogues, on Facebook, Africa Leadership Dialogues, on Twitter, @AfricaLD, and on WhatsApp, send your video comments to +254 715 816 033.
Thank you for sharing your views. Keep them coming in. Time now for Africa's Top 10.
On Africa's Top 10 this week, we feature the top UNDP goals for Africa post the Millennium Development Goals era in 2015. Starting us off at number 10 is ensuring good governance and effective institutions. Here, the goal is to provide free and continental legal identity, such as birth registrations, ensure people enjoy freedom of speech, movement and association, and to reduce corruption and ensure officials are held accountable. At number 9 is the management of natural resource assets and sustainability. This goal is aimed at safeguarding ecosystems, species and genetic diversity, as well as the accountability of governments and major companies on the use of all economic, social and environmental resources. Coming in at number 8 is the creation of jobs, sustainable livelihoods and equitable growth. The goal here is to increase the number of decent jobs, improve livelihoods, reduce the number of unemployed youth and those without skill set, and increase literacy levels among the youth. Securing sustainable energy takes the number 7 spot. The aim here is to double the share of renewable energy in the global energy mix, ensuring continental access to modern energy services and phasing out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies that encourage wasteful consumption. At number 6 is the achievement of continental access to water and sanitation. This goal can be achieved through providing access to safe drinking water in homes, schools, health centers and refugee camps, recycling or treating all municipal and industrial wastewater prior to discharge. Ensuring food security and good nutrition is the 5th goal. It aims to end hunger and protect the right of citizens at accessing sufficient, safe, affordable and nutritious food. It also aims at increasing agricultural productivity with a focus on the sustainable growth of small farmers' yields and access to irrigation. At number 4 is ensuring healthy lives. The purpose of this goal is to increase the proportion of children, adolescents, adults and elderly that are fully vaccinated, end preventable under 5 mortality, reduce the burden of diseases like HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, neglected tropical diseases and priority non-communicable diseases. Taking the number 3 spot is providing quality education and lifelong learning. The goal here is to increase the number of children able to access and complete pre-primary education, ensure that every child, regardless of circumstance, completes primary education and has access to lower secondary education. Slotted at position 2 is empowerment of girls and women and the achievement of gender equality. The goal is directed at preventing and eliminating all forms of violence against girls and women and child marriages, ensuring equal rights of women to own property, sign contracts and register a business, and eliminating discrimination against women in political, economic and public life. And at number 1 this week is ending poverty. The target of this goal is to bring down the number of people living on less than $1.25 a day to zero, reduce the share of people living below their country's 2015 national poverty line, and provide social protection systems for the poor and the vulnerable. And that's Africa's Top 10 this week.
Well, that's it from us this week. I leave you with a quote from former Nigerian head of state Olusegun Obasanjo. And he said, "My gut feelings and my faith tell me that until God shuts a door, no human can shut it." See you again next week. Blessings to you and blessings to Africa.